Toon Dreesen, who I would say is a friend of mine, is a graduate of Carleton University and the recipient of the Alpha Rho Chi Medal.
Sure.
Okay, just right here. Toon is a member of the American Institute of Architects and was inducted into the Royal Architecture Institute of Canada College of Fellows in 2016 and the Order of Da Vinci in 2020. He leads DCA Architects and is responsible for award-winning projects in infill development, laboratory research, industrial, and high-profile projects. Architects DCA is a company with roots dating back more than 40 years. He served 6 years on Ontario Association of Architects Committee and joined the council, where he served for 6 years, 2 as president. I think that's when we met, actually. Toon continues to serve on various committees and boards. He leads the company's activism in the role of architecture and social justice, gender equity, fiscal responsibility, and the role of architects in a strategic, visionary, and thoughtful planning. Toon is a recognized public speaker and published author in local and national media, including CBC Radio, the Globe and Mail, and Ottawa Citizen. Welcome, Toon. We'll turn it over to you.
Sounds great. Thank you very much. All set? All right. So in thinking about what I wanted to talk about today, I wanted to flag 3 things that rock, and 3 things that don't, and 3 things that need to happen next, and then lay out some of the challenges, opportunities, and exciting things that are happening. I apologize in advance if I'm a little quick in the delivery, and that I touch on a few things related to affordable housing and affordability and sustainability, but architecture is sort of covers so many different bases and covers so many different aspects. Next. Next. There we go. So density is good. So city plan objectives for density mean that based on current applications, as Catherine said, the number of homes in the Dalhousie Community Association could see a 100% increase. That means more homes, more families, and more people. Good, well-scaled density can be a good solution to our density targets. Paris, for example, is a city of 11 million people, largely in 6 to 8 story buildings with a density of 21,000 people per square kilometer, compared to Ottawa at an average density of 317. Paris is also a great walkable city. It's supported by excellent transit with great neighborhoods filled with parks, trees, and vibrant street life. Next. More people mean more services. More homes and more people means there's a demand for new and better schools, community centers, parks, and public spaces, as well as more people supporting small businesses in the community. The greater the density, the higher the quality of the public space needs to be. That means we need high quality public spaces like parks, buildings for social infrastructure, and critically, the design of exterior spaces of private buildings, that there's a social contract between architects and the public to create something that is high quality that the public is left to look at for generations. These are places that can create social equity through built form. Next. So more density means less sprawl, which in the long run means a more sustainable and affordable city. We do need housing that suits families and isn't affordable. Our current approaches to design mean that urban infill housing tends to be small and not well suited for families, driving families to the suburbs. How can we address that through more proactive policy approaches that encourage more families in more urban environments? How do we break down the myth that you can't raise a family in an apartment when that's the norm in much of the world? Next. So there are 3 things that need improvement. Next. The wrong kind of density can mean that there's greater tension between super tall towers and existing low-rise and detached homes, especially if that density isn't designed for families. 432 Park Avenue, New York City, for example, at 85 stories, stands out in the crowd of New York skyscrapers. Aside from being for the ultra-rich with a penthouse at $95 million, imagine if we looked at our density in Ottawa as being achieved only by high-rises. Measuring density in units per hectare can be very misleading. A 4-story, 38-unit infill apartment building like the 360 Lofts pictured on the left, designed by our office nearly a decade ago, provides a density of 47 homes per hectare. The City of Ottawa targets for 2031 are that we have an average density of 15 homes per hectare. So a decade ago, we built a project that tripled the 2031 target. By contrast, 900 Albert is over 800 per hectare. Which is the right density depends entirely upon the scale of the site, the scale of the building, its location, its transit, and access to community spaces, and other public amenities needs not only capital funding, but sustained operational funding if we're going to care about what we build for the future. We fund capital investments separately from maintenance. We hire professionals for the design of capital projects by, to a large extent, risk avoidance based on marginalized scopes of work that limit outcomes and approaches based on the lowest possible fees. For example, in recent discussions with city staff, there was 28 library branches that needed maintenance and a $650,000 budget, with the staff having an urgent priority list for repairs. One roof leaked earlier than expected and caused damage to the building and collections, and as a result, all other projects got shelved to address a critical issue. That not only denies the public the opportunity to access critical social space, but it shelves all other projects which just become more urgent with the next crisis. So we need to rethink not only what we fund, but how we fund it. That might mean some uncomfortable discussions about taxation and priorities to decide what our goals are. Current policies and approaches discourage the sort of moderate mid-rise density that we need. A recent last-minute policy change limited development on streets like Parkdale, Holland, Booth, Gladstone, and Somerset to 4 stories, even though, for example, Holland and Somerset have existing 6 and 12-story buildings. So when we add both a physical setback at the front and a tapered 45-degree plane at the create a ziggurat of a building, and it diminishes both the utility and limits the number of homes to create more expensive solutions that change the viability of land for development. We need to rethink our planning approach. Next. So we need change. Next. No problem. So we need to make places for people. We need to have a better understanding of not only the right kind of density, but we need to see projects, even private development, as part of a holistic city-making process. Every single new and renovated building should demonstrate a positive social outcome. We should leverage the talent and creativity of our population to create hundreds of small places that lift the human spirit. And we should do this in addition to the big city-making transformative projects like LRT, a central library, or a hospital. People aren't passive users and consumers of the built environment. They're living, breathing, striving, and thinking individuals whose diverse backgrounds and capabilities, dreams and desires actively contribute to Canada's multicultural character. Architecture has the potential to enhance human life on so many levels, enabling Canadians to live more socially enjoyable, inspiring, and meaningful lives. For example, when HCMA architects partnered with the local BIA to transform laneways from being a shortcut to be an engaging public space, that contributed to the vibrancy of downtown's Vancouver and performance space. One of the alleys saw more than twice as many people using the space, while the number of men diminished, showing that it was not only busier, but it was more welcoming and inclusive. Next. We need to rethink the processes by which we fund, design, and maintain our public assets to get better places for people. It sounds good that we're spending $688 million on renewal of city assets, but we see that break down when we look at the detail. When we spend $76 million on road resurfacing, in addition to tens of millions on new roads, renewal of roads related to sewer work, and other road-related projects, but we only spend $7 million on building repairs and renewals and $15 million on new supportive housing. So we need to address roads and we need to repair and maintain them, but we need to rethink our process of creating new roads and where we choose to dedicate our priorities for the most vulnerable people in society. I actually question how we can spend billions on an LRT and hundreds of millions on roads and then destroy homeless encampments. Next. We need to rethink our policy approaches to incentivize the right kind of scale, density, and typology. We need a national architecture policy to help set goals for the society we aspire to and to integrate existing disparate policies. We need to rethink at a local scale of how we create incentives for the private sector development that moves us towards the sustainable, equitable, and sociocultural city of compassion we want to be. Next. So one of the crises we face is in housing affordability, a factor that is in time to market. Small-scale infill projects where an owner redevelops their home or builds a secondary dwelling unit are quick to go from idea to completion, but there's a limited market for this sort of densification and a limited appeal. Most units aren't accessible and they have limited sustainability targets and they meet lower thresholds for design, planning, and regulatory approval. Mid-rise projects take time. Planning approval alone can be a quarter to a third of the total schedule for a project. And independent studies from 2019 show that the cost of unnecessary planning delay can add $20,000 per unit per month of delay to the total cost of a home, with more than a third of that being direct construction costs. So a 50-unit building, unnecessarily delayed by 6 months, can see a $6 million total cost impact, with over $2 million of that being in direct construction cost increases. And that cost is directly passed on to buyers and renters. What this boils down to is that we need to improve the time to market. We need better procurement strategies for public sector projects and for housing projects, and a better planning approach that prioritizes the development we want and the more collaborative approach to getting mid-rise missing middle density. Next. Mid-rise works better for sustainable options like mass timber. That can reduce greenhouse gas emissions in construction, sequestering carbon in a durable building that relies on local technical expertise, Canadian lumber, and is freer from the sort of price escalations we see in steel and concrete. More sustainable buildings impact our overall greenhouse gas emission strategies. A 6-story building can support a solar grid that allows it to be net zero energy, while the same footprint on double the height has twice as much floor area and makes it nearly impossible to reach net zero energy. Using data from the Toronto Atmospheric Fund, if our city is made of more sustainable buildings, has fewer cars, and relies on electrified public transit, we can tackle 3/4 of our greenhouse gas emissions. The great thing about sustainable buildings is that they last. Unlike an electric car or bus that might last 10 years, a sustainable building just sits there looking good, ideally not moving, for decades, and adding to our quality of life. Next. We need to rethink the operations and maintenance and life cycle decisions we make. The circle is the life cycle cost of a building, considering everything and everyone affected by it. The gray is the salaries of the occupants and the users of the building. The orange is the operation and maintenance cost, everything from the new roof that gets replaced to the cleaning and the utility bills. The blue is the design and the construction cost. So if a library has a budget of $10 million, then we're lucky if the design fees might mean $1 million. Gives us $11 million for that little blue wedge. That means the operating cost is $99 million over the life of the building, and a staggering $440 million for the cost of the people working, living, playing, or otherwise using the building. So when we design and plan new public assets and pick the cheapest fees that don't allow for the creative exploration of an idea that reduces maintenance costs or sets arbitrary capital budgets that don't consider life cycle value, we impose a massive additional life cycle cost on the public, all in an effort to save a few dollars in design. As the charts on the left show, the level of influence is highest in early stages of design, and the cost of making these changes is lowest. Once you get into the operating and maintenance phase of a building, there's very few changes you can make, and the cost of making them is enormous. Next. Design has the power to transform lives, to create positive social outcomes that lift the human spirit. Design has the ability to make places, to create experiences, to affect lives and address social equity. Design can be part of reconciliation and tackle socio-cultural legacies, giving voices to marginalized people and creating an equitable environment in which people feel like they matter. Through design, we can make experiences positive. We can also do the opposite. We can look at design as a commodity, as a means to an end, as a line item on a budget sheet. These are choices we make, and one that can be changed by the voices in this room and on this call. These are our choices, and it's up to each of us to make design matter, because architecture is a political act. Next. So what is the missing middle? Next. It's effectively defined by what it's not. It's neither single detached homes, and it's not high-rise development. Some definitions in the missing middle include duplexes, townhouses, and low-rise apartments, and some definitions extend mid-rise as much as 8 or even 10 stories. Next. In our context, we should think of the missing middle as being 4 to 8 stories, but there are some key thresholds. Next. Under 4 stories, an apartment building is generally governed by Part 9 of the Building Code and is exempt from accessibility requirements, doesn't require an architect, and has low thresholds for sustainability. Typically, buildings like this would have surface parking, since the cost of an underground garage as well as space requirements isn't practical. This scale of building also exempt from many positive conversations, on how the site design affects the community. If the project's small, such as townhouses or semi-detached or stacked units, there could be virtually no community consultation. Next. All of that changes at 4 stories, but not only do you have to consider elevators, underground parking, sprinkler systems, HVAC systems, and so on. That drives the cost of the building up. Adding 2 more floors to go to 6 stories increases the number of units. That just barely makes the project viable. All that changes again at 7 stories, because codes don't reflect the difference between 7 and 70 stories. So it's very hard to recover the cost of even more expensive systems at a modest scale. Next. When we choose not to bury overhead hydro lines like we did on Bank, Somerset, or Gladstone, we create expensive offsets. When we layer on snow loading setbacks and angular plane restrictions, we make that even more difficult and essentially impossible to build anything above 4 floors or above 6. When we combine these elements, modest infill 4-story buildings don't really work. Next. So we have an official plan that sets goals. They're aspirational, but they need collaborative integration of policies. Next. For example, the new official plan insists on continuing to require road widenings on traditional main streets, taking 6,000 or more square feet of buildable area to widen roads that are already 4 lanes. Next. We need to connect social outcomes to development goals. We need to incentivize the development we do want. Those are choices we make when it comes to committees that approve applications. Next. We've known since 1951 that the Massey Report has the power shows that the power of design to have a positive impact on society. Next. By conscious choice, Edmonton has reformed its procurement process of public sector work. Every great architect in Canada is working in Edmonton, and not one of them works in Ottawa. This pays off in high quality public spaces. We could also choose to invest in public design competitions that attract ideas and talent from around the world. Next. We need to think innovatively and creatively. A few years ago, GRC architects undertook a self-initiated design study to see what would happen if instead of widening the Queensway, we buried it or removed it. There is immense local talent. We need to raise our voices and demand better built environments. This isn't just on city projects, but applies to how we plan, design, and approve private sector projects. We need to renew the social contract between developers, architects, creators, and people to make sure we give people a voice in how our communities are designed. This Angus Reid survey information shows that we need better places, more diverse voices, and a focus on design for positive social outcomes. I encourage you to take the survey at riseforarchitecture.com to add your voice to create better communities. And I think I'm 2 minutes over.